Greetings. This is Charlie Wharton, and welcome to our Creating Contentment podcast. Our goal with this effort is to try to get a head start on making the most of our opportunities. We hope to help you get your week started off on the right foot, and we hope to lay the groundwork for developing the contentment that can lead to an abundant life. The other night, in preparation for the upcoming baseball season, I was watching a replay of the final game of the 2023 World Series between the Arizona Diamondbacks and my Texas Rangers. I was listening to the national television broadcast of the game, which probably meant that it was new to me. I know that I watched the game on TV, but I probably listened to the Rangers broadcast. And even if Joe Davis and John Smoltz were talking at my house, I was probably so focused on the game that their chatter may not have registered with me at the time. However, something John Smoltz said has been ringing in my head ever since. In describing some pitchers' approaches, he said, "Perfect is the enemy of good." In essence, sometimes pitchers are so focused on making the perfect pitch that they're disappointed when they make a pitch that's merely good enough to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. While it's noble to try to do our best, sometimes when we try to be perfect, we lose our focus and drain ourselves of the energy we need to finish what we start. I can see this being a problem in Major League Baseball, where there's very little margin for error. But this observation struck a chord with me in so many elements of life. I've never really considered myself a perfectionist, but how often have I lost the joy of the moment because I didn't do something perfectly? How often have I given up on trying something new and exciting for fear of not doing it perfectly? How much stress and anxiety have I lived with, not because I didn't get the job done, but because I fear that people might look down on me because I didn't do it, you've got it, perfectly. Who knew watching a 2-year-old baseball game could be so educational? As I went back and researched this quote, I found a few variations of it, including one from the 18th century that observed, "The best is the enemy of the good." I actually like the Wikipedia explanation of these phrases where it says, "Achieving absolute perfection may be impossible. One should not let the struggle for perfection stand in the way of appreciating or executing on something that is imperfect but still has value." I've never really been a big fan of the phrase good enough, but maybe there is something to that concept. No, not when we use it as an excuse for not trying hard enough, but I think that we can use it to help us find satisfaction when we try and succeed, even if it isn't our best. As I've thought about what produces anxiety in many of us, I've come to realize that it isn't that we failed, we just didn't live up to the expectations of ourselves. By the way, for those of us who struggle with this, I would imagine that we are the problem. Most people welcome jobs well done, but we're the ones who see our flaws. It's easy to carry around a defeatist spirit that is unseen by others because we're still stressing about things that were acceptable to them in the past. In essence, we're our own worst enemies. So how can we overcome the stress and anxiety of unreal expectations? Well, first, remember that perfection is not only unrealistic, it may also be illogical. There are some things that can just never be done perfectly. Not because we don't have the ability, but also because there's no established standard for perfection. Take, for example, driving. There are traffic laws and rules of the road, but even in these, there are some subjective opinions and judgment calls. If we're constantly putting the pressure on ourselves to be the perfect driver, we'll never make it because there's no such thing. Now let's apply the same logic to some moral issue. Sure, there are sins and there are social mores that can guide our behavior, but that still leaves a lot of room for opinions. If our goal is to please everyone, we'll never be able to do it because not everyone agrees with what perfect looks like. However, if we do our best, we'll be successful. Secondly, we should focus on the decision-making process, not just the final outcome. Life can be a moving target, sometimes changing in mid-aim. So rather than focusing on always getting a bullseye, let's develop a wise approach to taking action. First of all, take your time. Secondly, gather the best information possible at that moment. Third, reflect on your past experiences. Fourth, be purposeful in your actions. And then, after it's over with, take the time to assess what has happened, enjoy the successes, and learn from the misses. I think another thing that can help us is to be open to accepting someone else's standards for success. No, I'm not talking about lowering our standards just to get out of doing a good job. However, if we don't do something perfectly, but others are pleased with the outcome, maybe we should treat that as the victory. A fourth thing that we can do is to do the best with what we have. We've already seen that we're not perfect, and neither are those around us. This means that we'll often be handed situations that lack all the elements for us to do them perfectly. When we refuse to work on something until everything or everyone is up to our standards, we're not going to get much done. So when this happens, rather than complaining and anguishing over what we don't have, we'll be in a better mood if we just use what we have at our disposal. I think a fifth thing that we need to keep in mind is to maintain a sense of humor. When seeking to do things in a certain way, we tend to be focused on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and that can often skew our perspective to the point that we lose our ability to see the softer side of life. As we go through life, funny things happen, sometimes to us, sometimes to others. I'm not advocating that we laugh at others. Rather, we need to remember to laugh at ourselves and to laugh with others. The final thing we need to keep in mind is to leave room for forgiveness. A lot of us are good at forgiving others because we understand that everyone is human and humans aren't perfect. In fact, some of us do a good job of living by the principles of Colossians 3, verses 12 and 13 that says, "So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you." Now here's the question. Are we willing to forgive ourselves? God has gone to a lot of effort to introduce forgiveness into the world. Are we willing to give it to ourselves? Now again, I'm not talking about using it as an excuse for poor behavior or shoddy workmanship, but are we willing to admit our mistakes, learn from our failures, and move forward to the next phase of life? Folks, let's not be too harsh on ourselves. This week, when we start to feel the anxiety creep in, let's take a deep breath and remember we just need to get it right, not perfect. Let's make it a point to treat people fairly and do a good job. And when we do that, we'll see a lot more successes and feel a lot more successful. We wish you the best as you navigate your week, and we hope that you'll join us again next week for another chance to discuss ways that we can create contentment.